welcome to this week's episode of The Language of Leadership. I'm your host, Chuck Marting, and today we have Dr. Greg Woodard with us today, and I am extremely grateful to have you on the show today. I've read quite a bit and listened to some interviews that you've done, and I'm pretty excited about having you here. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invite. I'm looking for the opportunity.
Awesome. Can you let our listeners know just a little bit about yourself and what it is that you're doing? Some people may be familiar with you, and then we have other listeners that may not. But that's the great thing about the language of leadership is we're bringing in leaders such as yourself to help guide and direct people, and to give them the information and the guidance that they need to be good leaders.
Well, thanks for that opportunity, Chuck. I guess I'll start off by saying this is Veterans Day, so I'm going to acknowledge all the people that are veterans. I am a veteran of the Marine Corps, and then I'm also now serving active duty as a Navy chaplain. I hold a doctorate in ministry in leadership renewal and coaching from Regent University. I'm an endorsed leadership and Enneagram coach. But most importantly, I don't know if you can see it on my shelf back there, I'm a dad. I'm a devoted Christian husband, father. So 2 great kids, a great wife. Kids are now out of the house. The wife and I are trying to figure out how to be empty nesters. It's been an interesting journey. So yeah, great. That's the basics about me.
Well, again, thank you we talked briefly before we came in, and I just want to thank you again for your service and what it means to us as a nation and as a community. Like we talked before, my dad was a veteran with the Marine Corps, and so I was raised with that understanding and appreciation for the sacrifice and the things that have occurred with those that are serving. So thank you again for all your service and the things that you're continuing to do. So that's great.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, we talked a lot about some leadership things, and there's a lot of things that that you have talked about yourself, and we'll put in the links to your website and to your blog. You've got some articles on your blog that are pretty great, and I enjoyed them. But I wanted to ask you before we get started, what do you feel leadership is?
Well, I think the most important thing that a leader needs to understand is its influence. I serve in the military. I'm a chaplain. I'm not a line officer. I'm not ever going to be in command. And so I spend a lot of time with military folks, military leaders, and those military leaders are at the higher levels, the lower levels. And one thing I always remind them of, the military is full of rank. Your whatever your rank is, your rank and your last name, and that's the way Marines refer to themselves. And that can easily be translated into positional leadership. I should start off also by saying that this idea, one of the concepts, that whole idea of leadership as influence, it comes from John Maxwell. It's not original with me. He says that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And one of the most common conversation points, I'm going to jump ahead. Maybe you're going to ask me this in a minute, but in this context of what is leadership is not about power. There is power that exists in certain positions and certain ranks. But at the end of the day, leadership that is done out of influence is going to breed loyalty. Leadership that's done out of any other kind of position or power is not going to breed. It might get the job done in the short term, but it's not going to breed long-term loyalty. So, short answer: leadership is influence.
Yes, and I totally agree, and I love that definition with how leadership should be viewed. When you have somebody that's brand new, and I'm sure you've come across this, a lot of times it's their first time having quote unquote a sense of power, that they're in charge, things like that. And so I feel like it's probably a natural thing to kind of test the waters a little bit to know that you have that ability. What
Mm-hmm.
would be your guidance to a new leader that's coming into play with a new team? Um, how to take on that responsibility, but also to have your team start developing that respect for you and to want to follow you as a leader.
I'm smiling because this is a very, very common question. And most generally, it's the very young, the earlier, the it's usually the junior of the leader that's coming to me and complaining about the leader. If I had the chance and when I do have a chance to talk to leaders, I always remind them, again, in the military culture, you've got the best leaders that I've ever had in my entire career, whether that's a senior enlisted, a sergeant major, a command master chief, or a commander. The ones that have had the most influence and the strong and longest lasting and most dynamic loyalty in their commands and in their role. A senior enlisted is not going to be in command, but they lead out of influence. So I would say to that young leader, take the time to gain influence. Don't use your position and make people do what you want them to do because you have a position. Take the time to build influence. And when you do that, you're going to breed loyalty. And when you can build loyalty, your leadership is going to last for the long haul.
There's a lot of wisdom in what you just said. And so that's one of the reasons why I really like that question. Being able to talk to people such as yourself that have been in that position. And I think that you're kind of in a unique position, being able to see not only new leaders like what you're talking about, but seasoned leaders as well. And I think it's even an issue with seasoned leaders sometimes. I had an experience yesterday with a seasoned leader where he was asking some questions that probably would have been better off with he and I talking away from the team. But I think
Yeah, maybe.
sometimes emotion gets involved and we forget. And so, having been taught and learning things, I just kind of smiled and said, we'll talk later," because I didn't want to put on that show in front of
Mm-hmm.
the whole team. Because while we're talking, I'm looking and I'm seeing the team that's there, and they're looking at him, looking at me, and they're waiting for the reaction. And so I think
Yeah.
that can be damaging too. But I don't think sometimes leaders understand. I knew where he was coming from, but it wasn't the appropriate time to do it or the appropriate place to talk.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to go behind closed doors with leaders. And I remember one distinct time. I can tell the story if you like, but
Sure.
generally the leader was losing his influence. This was a structure where he was going to be basically like the second in command and leadership, and then he was going to have a successful tour in that role, and then he was going to fleet up and become the commander. And he tended towards domineering and was very apt to be the one that was calling out the team, whoever that team was in that environment, maybe some of the other leaders, some of the other staff leaders. And we requested, because this is military, right? We can't just like demand things. We were all at a threshold of leadership below him, and we had to ask him for a closed door meeting and look him in the eye and say, and we all this was like, there were like 10 of us in the room and one of him. And we said, look, you're losing the team here. There's another strong group that all the senior enlisted, you're losing them, you're losing us. And we believe that you're on your way to losing the command as a whole. And I know in hindsight, after the fact, that he was close to losing the commander's leadership. He was about to get fired, basically. And to his credit, this leader acknowledged what he had been and took it upon himself to learn from us what he needed to do to change the way that he was perceived as a leader. And that worked because we did it respectfully. We did it behind closed doors. We didn't call him out in public, and we didn't embarrass him. Now, he might have been embarrassed because we had to confront him, but we didn't do it in a way that the rest of the command knew that we were doing it. We did it on behalf of the rest of the command. We did it in private. And that goes to your point. If you have something with another leader, you need to do it in private. Now, obviously, there are some circumstances that require a public acknowledgement of something that was wrong and all that kind of thing. We know that. But in generality, we want to do this kind of thing in private. I don't like to be corrected in public. I receive correction still don't receive it well. I'm learning, but I receive it. I'm more apt to receive it if it's done in private. So
I think that's an important point, is having that ability to do that. Sometimes it's hard for a leader to admit to the things that are going on is their fault in front of their own team. So that goes back to what you were just saying, and embarrassing them or putting them in a position where they feel like they're going to have to justify themselves, like, this is why I'm doing that. So I totally agree with you. It's a very delicate situation, but it could be handled in a way that it saves not only the leader's face, but you're able to help them.
And emotions aren't as apt to get involved when you're doing it in private.
Sure.
If they come up, they can be acknowledged and navigated. If you're getting all emotion in front of a group of people, maybe even especially in a military situation, it can be very destructive in the way that the team and that the leader receives the suggestions for course corrections. So.
Yeah. You talked a little bit earlier about being a Enneagram instructor, I guess is what you would call it.
Enneagram coach.
Yeah. There we go. I wanted to ask you, can you explain, and I'm sure we could probably do a podcast just on that topic itself, and we may end up doing that, I don't know. But I wanted to check with you to see if you could explain to our listeners what that is, what it means, and how it would help them not only as a leader, but also their team in doing that.
Yeah, so I'll give you the one sentence answer. Books have been written about what the Enneagram is, but a one sentence statement of what the Enneagram is. It's a tool to help people have healthy relationships with themselves and with others. So that can be expanded. As I said, I have volumes on my shelf behind me that go into much greater depth about what the tool is, but that's the basic statements. It's learning ourselves, knowing how we relate to life, knowing our strengths, our areas of challenge, and then it improves the relationships we have with ourselves and with others. So it's my contention that the better that we know ourselves, the better that we can lead others. We have to know ourselves and lead ourselves before we can lead others. And if we don't, so self-leadership must include a deep, maybe I take this to an extreme in the way that I think about how much self-awareness we need to have. Part of that's my professional world as a military chaplain. I've had to take these deep dives into myself to make sure that I can navigate the conversations that I have to have with people that are in crisis. So there's this it's really important that we take a deep self look. So my point in saying that is self-leadership is gaining self-awareness. And if as a leader, self-leads, knows themselves, when they know their strengths and weaknesses, when they know their weaknesses, they can bring people onto their team that are more equipped in that particular area to add value to the team. And that takes a humble leader. Some leaders just try to do everything, and they're not working in their areas of strength, and then they end up moving towards burnout, and the team is dysfunctional and all these different things because they haven't taken the time to do good self-awareness, and the Enneagram is only one tool for doing that. We can name any number of other tools that are helpful for understanding our personalities at our deepest level. But when we do that, then that's an example that can be set for the other team members, because team members need to do the same thing. You may not be the leader, but you may not be the leader in the organization. You may not be the leader of the team, but everybody is a leader at some level. And so therefore, everybody needs to do good, strong self-leadership, self-awareness, and then they have a better understanding where they need to work, what they need to work on, and the greater value that they can add to the team by acknowledging their areas of strength and their areas of weakness. That was maybe too many words, but does that help?
Yeah, that helps explain a little bit more about that. So it gives them a blueprint, basically, to be able to understand not only themselves as a leader, but how to utilize that information and also help their team.
And I have. Oh, go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
I was just saying. So I think it would probably be even something that your team would find value in doing themselves as well, because it's going to bring that team together a little bit more on an intimate level of understanding each other, to be able to work with each other and to be able to accomplish the things that you're doing together as a team.
Yes, exactly. I have a whole bunch of illustrations and things that I could offer about this. Let me give you a couple of ideas. So I already mentioned, well, you just pointed out, it creates more unity when we know ourselves, when our team members know themselves, and when we know them. In a marriage, when you know your spouse's personality type, that can create unity, because you know that there's going to be areas that they're going to be strong in. There's going to be areas where they're not going to be as strong in. So we might also think about an introvert and an extrovert. I'm an introvert. I need alone time in order to recoup. When I do public things, most of us in professional ways, we do a lot of public things. An introvert like me, I need to pull away. I need to have time for myself, and that's where I recharge. An extrovert, my wife is an example. She draws energy from being in a crowd of people, being with people. And she's also learned how to draw back and have alone time. And I've had to do the reverse and learn how to increase my social self so that I can function well in society. So that's an example, just as a kind of a baseline. Generally everybody knows the differences between introvert and extrovert. And that's also mean that an introvert and extrovert are going to work in different ways. We're going to have a different way that we can function well inside of a team. I prefer to work privately and alone. I'm going to exercise alone. For an extrovert. And now here I am, an introvert, talking about what an extrovert does. It's probably pretty dangerous, but an extrovert is going to thrive more in a team approach to work. My wife's a social exerciser, so she loves to have a group of people that she's with. I need the brain break, and I need to be alone. So those are just examples of as an analogy for understanding the introvert, or understanding the Enneagram. So when you start to understand, the Enneagram has 9 different types, and each type has a different way. And I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll give you some examples. Some will be natural leaders. Some will be more naturally behind the scenes. If you put a more naturally behind the scenes person in a public leadership role where they have to cast vision, they may learn how to do that, may be able to do it well, but it may not be in their natural area of strength. A natural leader, if they're always behind the scenes, that's going to be draining for them. They need that public, they need the public opportunity to lead. Some will be task oriented, some will be research oriented. Those tend to have some overlap. They're many times, if we're task oriented, we tend to be more on the research side of things. Some will be better at providing empathetic customer care. I'm not the guy that you want doing customer care because, well, let's just leave it at that. My wife could tell you lots of stories. Some will need to be encouraged to step out of their comfort zone. So they're not going to push the boundary, and they might need to be pushed. They may need to be given a push to stretch themselves. Some will need to be reined in and encouraged not to push the boundaries as much. And that's all hinging upon parts of their personality and the way that they and their type. Some are equipped to see the right way to do things. I have a very strong sense of the right way. I want things to be done right, properly, and in order. And then some are just like, let's just get it done. It doesn't really matter how it's done. Right? It doesn't really matter. It's just let's just enjoy the fun of the experience. So those are just some examples. And if we can understand some of those things in the context of a team, if we understand who is more task oriented and who is the better empathetic customer care person and who's the better or the more natural dynamic public leader that can cast vision that everybody grabs onto, well, then we're going to have a unified team and everybody's going to be contributing at their greatest level of strength, offering their greatest level of contribution, and they're going to feel good about their jobs. They're not going to dread going to work every day because they hate what they're doing and hate what they're required to do.
I had a leader that did a lot of the things that you're talking about. And one of the things that really impressed me was his taking time for each member of the team on a one-on-one basis, just to get away, even if they went for a short break or just went to lunch or something like that, just to have a general conversation, nothing to do with work in and of itself, but getting to know that individual. Yeah. I thought that was so beneficial as a leader, and I respected that because it showed me that not only is he wanting to be a leader, but he wanted to know me and how he could better my ability to function within that team. I think that's something that you see with experience. I don't know. How do you develop that in a leader to recognize that they need to call upon the strengths of other people in the team and not make it look like, this is the golden child over here. I'm going to this person all the time, because then that starts contention within a team itself. Yeah.
So, well, I think that's a very important point. Getting to know each of your team members individually, you're gaining some understanding of. There's any number of other things we might talk about as well. Backgrounds have something to say with the way people relate. Many in my world come in out of broken systems, broken relational family dynamics, and they maybe are missing father figures. And so then the dominant male leadership of a military member, of a military leader, they have to, if they understand that somebody is lacking a father figure in their life, they're going to nuance the way that they lead that individual. But how do they know that? Well, that leader has taken time to know that individual and ask questions about, in non-threatening ways, but has learned their background. And this point could go in a lot of different directions. I think of family dynamics. When a leader understands that a certain team member maybe they have a special needs child at home, and that takes a great deal of emotional energy. If you don't take the time, that may or may not be something that ever comes up inside of a work context. But by taking the time to know that individual, and over time they gain trust in you, and they share that, well, then you have a sense of, when they come in with a different level of emotional energy, that there's maybe a reason for it. And I think when we and when you simply show interest in somebody, that goes back to that earlier point that I made about influence. When you take the time to know somebody and get to know them at a personal level, aside from whatever task they're going to be offering to you, that breeds loyalty, and that builds the influence. If you just simply positional, I'm here, I'm in this dominant role, you're going to do this because I said so, and never take the time to get to know them as people, you're not going to have a loyal team. And I have to remind, part of my role as the people person in my culture, sometimes I have to remind those leaders that have a mission requirement, and it's an important mission, doing the nation's business. I have to remind them that there are people that are helping you fulfill the mission that you're required to do. And sometimes that causes them to stop and take a deep breath and dial back the way that they're responding to the crisis situation, remembering that there are people that are taking care of that mission. So those are all things that I think about, that when you take that time, it builds resilience, it builds loyalty, and it helps you to gain influence.
When you have somebody that is a seasoned leader, or somebody who's just starting off in leadership, and they discover Enneagram or any of these other type of personality assessment tools, can that individual who's already been leading change his leadership style and still be an effective leader with his team?
Well, I pointed out one situation that I know of that leader did change, and everything that I heard, I wasn't there when they took command, but they had a successful command tour. And you don't have a successful command tour unless you've built a team around you that's loyal to you. Every day, you can read it. It's never hidden. There are command structures that get fired all the time. They lose the confidence of their leader. But to your question, so my answer is yes, they can. It's sort of like, I'm not a young guy anymore. You can tell I have no hair, and I'm a little bit more seasoned in my journey. And my son would be happy to remind everybody that wants to know that I'm an old guy. It's like leading, and I told my wife I might have even been this morning. I said, I'm not going to nuance too many more things about my life. I'm pretty set in the way that I am. I'm pretty comfortable with what I am. I know who I am. Do I have areas of strength and weakness? Well, obviously, like we all do. But you get to a certain point in life, and it does become harder to change. A leopard can't change its spots, right? But leaders need to always be learners. Leaders need to surround themselves with people that they trust, that when they give them feedback, they will respond and they will make the change. Not every bit of feedback means the leader needs to dramatically change. Probably in most cases they don't. But if they're not getting the bottom line results, I'm not a business guy. I'm a military chaplain. So, but when you're in business and you're not getting the bottom line results, something about the way the system is being done, maybe the finances of the organization are being run, something has to change. And it's the same. If a leader there's a point where it becomes tangible, where you know that your team's not unified. You're not running the same direction. You're not running towards the same vision. That leader needs to be a learning leader, and be willing to solicit the feedback, do a 360 review, get peers to speak into their life, get subordinates to speak up to them, get leaders to speak to them. Every leader has a leader, and then take on board the things that they're being told, and make the required change. So I mean, I think it. But again, and this kind of circles back to an earlier point too. It's incumbent upon a leader to have good self-awareness and to know who they are. And when they know who they are, and they have the kind of awareness to know that they have weaknesses and strengths, well, then they can proactively over time work on their areas of weakness.
You brought up a lot of good points. And one of the things that I've seen and I've experienced, and as a coach yourself, as a leader, as a military chaplain, the loneliness of leadership is a very real thing.
Oh, yeah.
I think that a lot of times individuals who would have probably sought out guidance or direction are hesitant to, because of that loneliness they feel. They feel like they're having to do this alone, that if they go to somebody such as yourself, a chaplain or a coach, seeking guidance and direction, it shows weakness or their inability to be a leader. What would you say to individuals that are experiencing that right now? How coming to someone as a coach, a chaplain, or somebody that's in a trusted mentoring position, how that's going to benefit them?
There's a number of things that I would say in response to that. I think a trusted coach, a trusted chaplain, a trusted whatever therapist, that's a sacrosanct conversation. So if they come to you, nobody else has to know. Hopefully, if we're getting to the point where you're being directed to go see somebody to get some help, well, then you've already got a problem, and you're already behind. You're behind the point of it's a known entity anyway, or it's a known problem anyway. So generally, those of us that are in these helping professions, or really any sort of leader, if they are asking for help, is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's a sign. Now, leaders need to also they need to be confident, but they need to be humble. So there's this mixed thing that needs to happen with leaders. They need to have some empathy. They need to have confident leadership, but they also need to have a humble spirit, a servant style of leadership. Why are they leading? They're leading for the value and benefit of those that are in their sphere of influence. So if a leader's not healthy, over time, the team's going to become unhealthy, the organization's going to become unhealthy, and it's going to continue to spiral. So the best thing for a leader to do is to acknowledge that they're not perfect, and to be able to say that it's to know that it's okay to ask for help. I'm not going to go, I've had many private conversations with leaders, and who never knew? Anybody except for the leader. And that's important for them to understand that and believe that I'm going to keep it secret, keep it to myself. Secrecy is a buzzword, a loaded word. Maybe we don't want to use that, but we're going to keep it confidential. We're going to keep the conversation between me and the individual. And that gives the leader some freedom to be able to acknowledge that they have an area that they need to work on. So don't be too proud to ask for help. Maybe that's the bottom line way I would say it.
Yeah, I look at, when I think about that and what we just talked about, I think of someone like Tim Grover, who is a coach mainly to athletes, Michael Jordan, um, LeBron James, all these guys, where he would get a call in the middle of the night from
Mhm.
these guys and go and help them. And I think it's important to understand that there's a reason for that. That even though that individual seems like they've got it all together on the outside,
Yeah.
that as a leader, it's natural for you to still feel anxiety, to feel um,
Yeah.
like you're lost and
Yeah.
need direction. How do you decide where that direction should come from?
Well, first, that's a great point. You can name any number of people that are in high levels of visibility, and 9 times out of 10, they have somebody that's coaching them.
Yeah.
So, and that's a very true statement. Can you state your question again?
Basically, it's just how would somebody that is suffering from that, how do they find someone like yourself, or where do they need to go or and to look for somebody? Because a lot of times leaders don't know where to turn. And I think that's the biggest thing is when you get to that point, where do you turn?
Well, I mean, I think obviously there's always there's always people that are in some form of therapy. There's counselors that are available. I mean, a quick Google search could create a whole list of potentials. But also leaders, there a lead or a coach or a counselor develops a reputation inside of a community.
Exactly.
Um, that one individual comes to see me or to see another chaplain or to see a coach, and then they have a good experience. They over time understand that I am going to keep between them and me what we talked about. They trust me. And then when they have somebody, another leader who who's going through something similar, whatever, name any number of different things, uh, that then that my name or whoever's name is going to come up as a trusted individual. Well, you should talk to. They understood my dynamic and they were really helpful. You should talk to them. So it's reputation, inside communities. You develop that over time. I think too that leadership is lonely, and leaders need to have circles of people that they trust that can help them to discern where they might need to seek some guidance, and then that network of helping providers becomes just known in the area, known in that amongst that group. All these different coaches that coach high level people, they've built reputations over the years as being able to work with people that are more high profile. I mean, that's just one example. We can name any number of people like that. So
You talked about John Maxwell at the beginning of this, and he makes a statement throughout a lot of his books where it's that servant mindset of
mhm.
serving others, letting them know that you love them, that you're there, that in turn will bring those people or gravitate them to you or seeking you out. And I think that's pretty obvious in what you're saying right now, why you have people coming to you and seeking you out for that guidance and direction. I've often heard leaders say, if they would have told me that it was going to be like this, I probably would have never even did this. Um,
I've had many leaders that have said that. Man, Greg, this is beyond. One person can't do this. And that's true. That's why you need a team of people to help you and a trusted advisor to help you.
exactly, exactly. I've really enjoyed our conversation today, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. And you've given us a lot of insight and guidance that is just valuable. And so, thank you for doing that. Um, one of the things I wanted to ask you, and we talked about this earlier, is every great leader is continuing their education, whether it's reading, whether it's interviewing and talking to other people, belonging to a mastermind, or whatever the case may be, to continue their growth as a leader. I love reading, and I know that obviously with the books that are behind you and everything else, you're a reader as well. So, if you're here in Denver and we go out to lunch and we're having a conversation, what would be that book that you would tell me, Chuck, you've got to read this. It'll help you in your leadership. It'll change you. What book would that be? I know there's a
Well,
lot of them out
as
there.
a chaplain, read the Bible, like that'll
Sure.
help you. Okay, well and that's true, but it's
Yeah.
sort of a cop out answer because
No.
a common so that's one thing that's one I would say. I think I've been helped over the years by a lot of John Maxwell's books. He wrote a book a long time ago called Failing Forward. That was helpful for me during some challenging seasons of my life. Biographies, I mean, there's lots of different people in the world and in history that, pick any number of different individuals that have led well. Lincoln's, a team of rivals, that idea of having a team of people that think differently than you and the value in that. Those are, and then, I've got a variety of business books. I've Pat Lencioni's written a few books along the way that have been helpful for building good, strong teams. But those are the ones that kind of come to mind right away.
Well, I wanted to take a moment and just acknowledge you for a moment and let you know that the work that you're doing and the things that you're doing are important and they are appreciated. And I know you have a presence on the internet, on LinkedIn. I see you posting, I see your blogs. And I just want to thank you for that. I know that it takes time and it takes energy to do that. But when you have a leader who's passionate about what they do and they not only speak it, but they show it, and it's very obvious that that's what you're doing. So I just wanted to take that time to thank you for that.
I appreciate that.
Is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience, that as a leader and as a person who instructs and trains and coaches leaders, what else would you say to them in closing?
Do proper self-leadership and do effective self-care. Self-leadership is essential. I've unpacked it a little bit in the earlier part of the conversation. We didn't talk too much about self-care. I learned more than a decade ago, that I had to stop the work and I had to be able and willing and not feel guilty about doing good self-care. I needed it, but more importantly, my family needed it. When leaders take care of themselves, they're more effective leaders. If leaders are neglecting themselves, it's a recipe for burnout. So that's the biggest, most important thing that I would say. And when you do that, when you lead yourself well, you take care of yourself well, you're on your way to living your best life. And isn't that what everybody wants? We leaders need to win at home. That's first. And they need to, they win in their organizations or their professional environment. Both of those require good, strong self-leadership, self-awareness, and self-care.
I agree. So very, very true. Dr. Woodard, thank you for being on The Language of Leadership and for allowing us to have some insights from you. And I look forward, and I'm sure that we'll have you back on as a future guest again to speak on some of these things. So thank you for being here. I will make sure that we have contact information in the show notes for you, for your website, and also the books that you had talked about. And thank you again.
All right, Chuck, thanks very much. I enjoyed very much talking to you and this opportunity. So
Awesome.
it's very helpful for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.